Rossana Orlandi Gallery, we're showing my series that I call Running the Numbers, which is a series of photograph-based collages. I've never figured out exactly what to call them, but they're images that depict statistics about our mass consumption, and in this case, our consumption of plastic. There's, in each one of the Running the Numbers pieces, there's a connection between the small sort of pixels, the small objects, and the big image. In this particular one, you can see, of course, the famous painting by Van Gogh. And the reason I chose this painting is that if you look at the swirl, it's an almost, just by coincidence, an almost perfect map of the ocean current in the Pacific Ocean. So if you get a map of the Pacific current and you look at that swirl and then this one, it's as if Van Gogh knew all about the Pacific garbage patch. And so what I was hoping for this one is, here's a little village, and floating over the village is the idea to remember that our plastic, even if we live way inland, our plastic can end up out in the ocean. So ocean plastic is something that I wish would be in everyone's consciousness, sort of floating over our village as a reminder of where the plastic in the ocean comes from. My whole Running the Numbers series is based on the inability of the human mind to understand, to comprehend very large numbers. So it's such an interesting thing that every day we read gigantic numbers in the millions and the billions, and now we talk numbers in the trillions. In the economy, we talk about trillions quite frequently as if we understand it. And we think we do understand it. But actually, the human mind only has the ability to understand really small numbers that are like the size of our family. And if we can't comprehend the issue, we can't experience it with our senses, we can't see a Mount Everest-sized pile of our plastic bottles, there's no way to see it except with this gigantic number, then we don't comprehend the issue. And if we don't comprehend it, we don't feel anything. One of the issues that I grapple with in my Running the Numbers series is the relationship of each individual to the incomprehensibly massive collective that is our world. And that's one of the kind of psychological, emotional issues that I think is really disempowering to most people, is we each feel we're too small to make a difference. And it's true. There's a truth to that. We are, as one individual, it's really hard to believe we can make any kind of difference. And at the same time, it's also true, it's a paradox, that when hundreds of millions of people all behave as if they make no difference, then it makes a catastrophe, which we all know we're in now. So somehow we do make a difference as individuals. And so with each of these pieces, there's a giant collective that is made up of lots of very, very small individuals. And you could say with each one, if I added one more cigarette lighter in there, you wouldn't even notice it. And at the same time, if I took out one cigarette lighter, you would see there'd be an empty space. So every individual is in its place making its own contribution. And so it's just a way of kind of wrestling with that, with our smallness and the enormity of our world. There's a common thread that runs between my Running the Numbers series and the Albatross film, even though they appear to be really different from each other. And what it is in the Running the Numbers series, with all of these images, I'm looking at some kind of really huge global phenomenon. And all of the time that I was making these images, there was always a little bit of dissatisfaction that I felt trying to face this global scale. And I was always wishing that there would be some kind of way to face a global issue on a personal scale. And I couldn't think of how that could be. And that's when I learned about the tragedy that's happening on Midway Island. And as soon as I saw these birds whose bodies are filled with just one handful of plastic, it told the whole story with just that tiny quantity. Because on such a remote island, in the very middle of the world's largest ocean, in the most fragile, innocent, vulnerable place imaginable, here's the tip of an iceberg poking up inside the stomachs of dead baby birds. And if you just see the tip of that iceberg, you comprehend the whole thing. When I first learned about what's happening on Midway Island, the only thing I heard and the only thing I was interested in at the time is that there are birds whose bodies are filled with plastic. And I just immediately felt a really powerful pull to go to this place and witness that phenomenon and photograph it. And when I met the live birds on my second trip there, it was the most astonishing thing because they're huge, magnificent beings, as big as eagles, with a gigantic wingspan, and they have no fear of humans. And so you can walk right up to them, or they walk right up to us. They're curious. And so if you sit down amongst lots of them, pretty soon you're surrounded by a whole bunch of them that are just like looking right at you. They come up this close and maybe just nibble a little bit. Their beak is really sharp. If they want to, they can rip a big hole in your arm, but they just really softly like check you out, like, what is that thing? Never seen one of those before. And being so close to them is just this magical experience. And I realized if I come back with a movie camera, I can film them up so close. And it began to turn from a horror story. It started as a horror story and it began to kind of morph into a love story. And the name of the island became the central philosophy, Midway, to stand midway between the bad news of the birds filled with plastic and sort of symbolically the bad news of our world, and the good news, which is such beauty and magnificence and mystery and this miracle that we're all a part of. Stand midway and hold those two things in some kind of balance. What I was really intending with Albatross is to make an internal journey rather than only an external journey. And for me, the experience out there, something really unexpected happened to me. And it's that experience that I try to hand over in my film, which is I felt a tremendous amount of sadness being with the birds as they died filled with plastic. And I was really surprised by how much I felt. And in that process of grieving the suffering of these beings who I had fallen in love with, I realized that the reason that I felt that sadness was because I loved them. I think really I could say that all of my work is about, in one way or another, reconnecting with our love for the living world. I mean, that to me is the missing piece in our culture. We've each individually to some extent, and we've collectively forgotten this most obvious thing, the most obvious possible thing. It's like they say that fish don't know that they swim in water because it's so close to them. And we have forgotten a similar thing. It's just we don't notice how amazing our world is. And we forget the essential state of being that we are born in is to just be like, oh, wow. I'm about to go spend some time in the Czech Republic photographing one of Europe's oldest, dark, mystical, magical forests for a couple of months. This other project I'm working on is about looking at the play of light, just the dancing, shimmering, flickering play of light on water, with no intellectual justification, with no philosophy behind it, with no bad news or activism, just because, yes.